Hi, this is Sheb Varghese. Welcome to the Faith Colloquium podcast. Today, my guest is Ryan Mullins, and we're talking about disability theology. Ryan, thanks for talking with me again.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Ryan, the first question I have is, what is disability theology? And maybe you can share a little bit about how you got thinking about disability theology.
Right. So my sister, Kelly, has Down syndrome. And so that's kind of what initially got me interested in the topic. So my family, we've been active in Special Olympics for most of my life, and I've been a part of several different disability communities, throughout my whole life. So I've just kind of grown up with this personal familiarity with issues surrounding disability. But it wasn't really until I think it was around 2008 when I became aware that disability theology was a thing. So during my master's, I was doing this independent course on something called cultural hermeneutics. And so I was doing a bunch of, looking at different theological questions related to gender, sexuality, and whatnot. And then I came across Amos Yong's book, Down Syndrome and Theology. And so that's when I kind of got into the issue and discovered there's this whole huge world of disability theology. So that's how I originally got into it. But what is disability theology? That's a really tricky question. So defining some of these issues, it comes with different kind of problems here. So my first paper, when I published on this, I defined disability theology as this project in postmodernism, which just kind of means, I guess the claim amongst postmodernists is that all voices allegedly have a say, an equal say on all matters. But it might be better to say that disability theology, as it's commonly practiced, it's sort of a form of critical theory approach to theology.
Okay.
But sometimes that's a bit hard to figure out what that means. So in more popular kind of jargon, you might just say it's identity politics applied to theology.
Okay.
So let me break down the idea, I guess, a bit for you here. So the idea, when you're doing any kind of critical theory applied to theology, what you do is you take some sort of oppressed perspective. Any oppressed perspective you like, it doesn't matter. You just take some oppressed perspective, and you look at the theological doctrines that led to that group's oppression, and then you use that oppressed perspective to kind of critique the theological doctrines and hopefully articulate a better account of theology from the position of that oppressed perspective. So when you're doing disability theology in this sort of regard, you look at the disabled perspective, and then you talk about, what theological doctrines led to the oppression of people with disabilities, and then how do I use the disabled perspective to kind of re-articulate theology. That's the idea, the general idea at least.
Okay, so people may be familiar with feminist theology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is there a bit of a parallel here in that sense, with disability theology?
I think there is in a very important respect. So I think one of the problems that you had in feminist theology is that as different feminist theologians are entering into the scene, they start saying, hang on, I don't know what you're talking about the feminist perspective. That doesn't look like mine. And so they started this project that you might call a decolonization project of trying to allow all these different feminist voices to stand up and say, this is what, my feminist perspective looks like. It's not the same as yours. And that hasn't happened yet in disability theology as far as I can tell, because I have this worry that within disability theology, it can quickly become a form of colonialism, because what you get is some of the people working on disability theology, what they do is they'll kind of select a certain set of voices to be representative of the disabled perspective. But I don't think there is such a thing as the disabled perspective, because people with disabilities, they're all unique and they all have a vast range of ideas and beliefs about lots of different issues.
Right.
So I think this is, when you start talking about the disabled perspective, what you can do is you can kind of create this place where different communities become very quickly polarized. You can even hear people saying that if you don't really affirm certain beliefs, then you don't really know what it's like to be disabled, or you don't really understand the disabled perspective, even if you do have a disability.
Wow.
And so I think that sort of thing needs to happen. That decolonization project that I see going on within liberation theology or within feminist theology, I think that needs to happen within disability theology as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful. So philosophers like to define their terms.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe you can help us understand what is a disability and what's the fuzziness around that term.
Right. Yeah, this was really, really difficult when I first got into this stuff because I did not understand what these people were talking about. They weren't defining any of their terms, and so I just eventually was like, I'm just done. I'm not going to bother with this. If you're not going to define your terms, I'm not going to talk to you. But Elizabeth Barnes, though, she has a lot more patience than I do. So she's an analytic philosopher, and she wrote this really interesting book called The Minority Body a few years ago, and a big part of the book is her effort to just try to say, what are these people in disability studies talking about, and how are they really defining their terms? And so she goes through all these different kinds of definitions and tries to look at which ones really work and which ones don't. And I think it's a great gift to the field of disability studies. But here are some different. We'll just look at a couple different definitions she gives, some of the problems that they have, so listeners can kind of understand what they're getting into if they want to actually read on this topic.
Yeah.
So the first definition she looks at are what she calls naturalistic definitions. And this is the sort of definition I'm assuming that most people just kind of have in their mind. And the idea is this. So you define a disability in terms of having or lacking some particular physical feature. And either having or lacking this particular physical feature prevents a person from functioning normally.
Okay.
So let me give you an example. So like one of my friends, his dad used to be a lumberjack. And then he got in an accident and he's paralyzed from the waist down.
Okay.
So this guy is going to say, I'm disabled because I used to be able to use my legs and now I can't.
Okay.
So I've got these physical features that prevent me from, a normal range of human activity.
Okay.
So, it seems kind of straightforward, but Elizabeth Barnes, being a very clever analytic philosopher, she'll start pointing out, well, can this definition actually handle different kinds of cases of things that we want to say are disabilities or are not disabilities? So she gives this example of someone who, maybe say they're really short, a really short person, but they're not so short that they're diagnosed with dwarfism. And so a person like this, they can struggle to do all sorts of things that I can do quite easily. When I get on an airplane, I can put my bag in the overhead compartment, no problem.
Yeah.
Not a big deal. But if you're really short, you're going to struggle with that.
Yeah.
And do you really want to say that just because you're a bit short, you've got a disability?
Sure.
And Barnes says that seems kind of counterintuitive. So maybe this definition, this naturalistic definition, maybe it's not really capturing the right stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So then she moves on to the second definition, and this is the definition that is very popular within disability studies as a whole and within disability theology in particular. This is what's called a social constructionist approach.
Okay.
So here's the idea. The idea is that disability is primarily a socially constructed thing. So being disabled is just a matter of how society treats you. So a person is disabled if society sees this person as having some kind of bodily features and society treats this person as having some sort of subordinate or less than status.
Okay.
And the idea being that if you're not disabled, then you're no longer, you're not going to be disabled if society starts treating you differently. So if they treat you negatively because of this feature, then you're disabled. If society stops treating you negatively because of this physical feature you have, then you're not disabled. That's kind of the idea here.
Okay, so you have you still have a bodily feature
of some sort.
Some sort. But it's not just that, it's also tied to the way that society treats you.
It's primarily about the way society treats you.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where I personally find that counterintuitive, because it seems to me that I could have lots of bodily features and society treats me all sorts of different ways, and that doesn't matter. It seems like the bodily feature is what's doing the disability stuff there. So that's kind of one sort of thing. Some people might just give you a really incredulous stare and say that's just not right. So I mean, think of go back to the lumberjack case, my friend's dad. So he's paralyzed from the waist down, and I think if you tell him that his disability is primarily about the way society treats him, he's probably going to have really strong words for you. Is my guess. He's going to say some really terrible things to you.
Yeah,
and you might kind of deserve it. I don't know.
But on this case, sorry, just to ask a clarifying question. So, to go back to your previous example, the person that's short and struggles with putting their luggage in the airplane overhead compartment, but isn't short enough to be considered a dwarf. That person, if they're treated negatively in society, they would be considered to have a disability.
Right. That on this social constructionist count. Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I kind of have this worry that it's just not quite that plausible. But Elizabeth Barnes, she points out a few other problems too, and this one's like a really serious objection, I think. So there's these things called invisible disabilities. So these are things like chronic fatigue or chronic pain, and it's not really easy to spot those when you're just looking at anybody.
Right.
And so Barnes points out like you just can't handle, like, this social constructionist view can't handle these kinds of invisible disabilities. So let me give you an example of this. Like, my mom had told me this story. So when you're at Disney World, you know how there's like they've got the fast pass now, like you can kind of like get through lines without having to wait in them forever.
Okay.
So back in the day, like, they didn't have these for everybody. It's just you would only get them if you got a handicap pass of some sort. And so when my family and I, when we would go to Disney World, we'd be able to, we get into the short line. So all these other suckers are standing in the long line, for like 3 hours to get on the ride, and like I'm just going straight through. So my mom told me this story about this woman. Her family had a daughter with like a chronic fatigue syndrome, and she could walk like short distances, like the daughter could, but standing in line for like an hour for a ride, like the daughter's going to pass out and just completely screwed for the rest of the day. Like, she couldn't handle that sort of thing. So they were able to get a handicap pass. Okay. Well, since she's just walking through the fast line, the daughter can handle that short walk through the fast line. So she doesn't look like she's got an obvious disability, but like some of the people in the long line are just saying the worst things to this family as they're walking through there, because they think that, this family's scamming the handicapped line.
Right.
And so what you have here is a case where this girl, she has this disability, but the way society is treating her, they're treating her terribly because they think she doesn't have it. And they think that she's scamming the system. And so you're like, well, the social constructionist thing, it doesn't seem like it can handle cases like that because it's giving us the wrong results here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So those are the two most common sorts of definitions. I'll just give you just one more that Barnes herself kind of is trying to work with and try to develop here.
Sure.
And I can't capture all the nuance that of her, like, her definition here, but this is just sort of the in a nutshell kind of version.
Yeah.
So here's what she tries to do. She'll say she wants to try to take the best of both of those definitions. Say, like, there are some physical features here, but we do need to look at the way some of these issues are socially constructed.
Okay.
So she'll say this. She'll say, disability just is whatever the disability rights movement is promoting justice for. So you're disabled if you have some particular physical feature, or you lack some particular physical feature, and members of the disability rights movement judge that this particular physical feature is worth promoting justice for. Okay. So that's kind of the idea.
Okay. So people in that community kind of get to have the say as to, like,
right,
is this legit or not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're the ones who get to say this is really disability, and then no, that's not a disability.
Okay.
I've got some real worries about this. So here's one of my worries that I have with this. I think it gives too much epistemic authority to the disability rights movements because it makes disability, in my opinion, I think it makes it far too political, like more political than it ought to be. So in order to really, I guess, be considered disabled, you have to be in solidarity with these different like disability rights movements. And if you like are not in solidarity with them, then that leaves open the very real possibility that you will be told you are not really disabled, or you do not understand what it is like to be disabled.
Okay.
And so you can easily point out cases of people who are deaf, like who cannot hear, and they're told you don't really have the deaf experience, or you don't know what it's like to be deaf because they've left or they've violated some of the norms of the community.
Sure.
And that, I think that just gives the wrong results.
Okay.
So, I mean, to be clear, like I'm aware of what some of these different disability rights movements are up to, and I think some of them are doing really great work. And all I have to say with them is just to say, "Amen, keep going."
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But some of these others, though, I think they get really political really fast, and I just kind of go, I don't know if I can follow you with some of the things you're saying, and if I have to be in solidarity with you in order to be considered disabled, or in order to be, an ally to the disabled. I don't know. That doesn't sound right to me. I just think it's making it a bit too political.
Okay.
But in general, though, those are some of the problems. Yeah.
So it sounds like this gets back to what you were saying earlier about, like, there's the pushback of as though there's this one disabled perspective or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's a worry that I have in general with a lot of this literature is they talk in terms of the disabled perspective. And
Okay.
I think that makes it very political in a way that we don't need.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Amos Young.
Sure.
You mentioned him earlier. So Amos Young is a theologian and writes about disability theology. And I think his brother has Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his brother Mark, if I remember correctly.
Okay. So I remember, Amos Young, he came and spoke at my college when I was in undergrad. And it was like, for those of us who were philosophy majors and Bible majors, it was this really kind of compelling, intriguing sort of thesis that he was presenting to us about maybe the potential of people still having disabilities in the eschaton. And
right, yeah.
And so for those of us who were attracted to things sort of like different and non-traditional, we were like, oh, this is an intriguing idea.
Yeah.
So first of all, maybe let's explain why would Amos Young think this? Why would someone think like that people might retain their disabilities in the eschaton?
Yeah, I should say though, like the first time I read his book, like I thought it was really attractive too. Like I really did buy into it because it's, I don't know, maybe it's because I was bored in seminary, and I'm like, anything that's different sounds kind of cool.
Right.
But also like when you have a loved one with a disability, like when you see somebody really standing up and speak what it seems like they're speaking for on behalf of your loved one, like it's very attractive.
Yeah.
So there's 4 kinds of reasons that you can find in the disability theology that someone like Young is up to. There's some other kinds of approaches that are being developed at the moment in analytic philosophy of religion, but the 4 that I typically see in disability theology at large, those are the ones I want to run through.
Okay.
So the first one, it says that like some disability theologians, like they're working with that social constructionist account of disability that I talked about earlier. So the one that says disability is primarily about the way society treats you. And so what they kind of do is they say the only thing that needs to change in heaven is the way that we treat people with different physical features.
Okay.
So the idea is like, well, when we get to heaven, like you stop being disabled in the sense that people start treating you with, full respect and full dignity. Okay. So your physical features are the same, but you're no longer disabled because disability is primarily a social category.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's kind of confusing when you're reading this stuff and you don't understand the social constructionist definition. So you're just going to be like, wait, how are these people not disabled if they still have all these different like physical features? It's because they're working with that definition. So that's something to keep in mind.
Okay.
So here's the second reason though. So the second reason, they're working with this assumption that there's this thing called the disabled perspective. And I know I've kind of harped on this a bit, but that's really what's at play here.
Yeah.
So the disabled perspective is given a great deal of authority on what our resurrected bodies will be like. And so there's this passage in Amos Young's book where he's quoting these different people with disabilities and what they think about heaven. And so some of the people that Young quotes, they say they will be resurrected with their disabilities intact forever. And as far as I can tell, this is treated as the disabled perspective. And here's why I think this. So Young also quotes some people with disabilities who say they will not be disabled in heaven. And after he quotes these people, he says this, and this is on page 244 of Theology and Down Syndrome. So after he quotes these people who are disabled and say, they're not going to be disabled in heaven, Young quotes this. And so this is a direct quote from him. He says, "To be sure, disability advocates may say that these are socially conditioned responses of the psychologically and religiously immature."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So in other words, like these disabled people, they're not really following through with the disabled perspective. And so I guess their opinion doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. And so what really matters is like the approved disability perspective. And the approved disability perspective tells us that, you're just, you're going to be physically and psychologically impaired for all of eternity.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's, I think, a major reason. But there's like this, there's two more though that I think that are quite popular. So the third one, it goes like this. it kind of focuses on like recognition and kind of vague appeals to continuity between my earthly body and my resurrected body. But the argument's really kind of fuzzy, so I'll just kind of stick with what I see people doing in print and what I see people doing at conferences. But it's hard for me to kind of dissect what the argument really is. So it goes something like this. So someone might say, if my son is not disabled in heaven, then I will not be able to recognize him, and the loving relationship that we have developed on earth will be lost forever.
Okay.
And so I guess the idea is that like God has to keep, someone's disabled son in this disabled state for all of eternity in order for the mom to be able to recognize this as her son, in order for them to continue the loving relationship they've had.
Okay.
And so when I kind of apply this to my own life, I guess I think like if I follow this reasoning, I guess I'd have to say, well, if I got to heaven and my sister didn't have Down syndrome, well, then I wouldn't be able to recognize her. And maybe I would say, did God really even resurrect her? Like, who is this person?
Okay. Okay. So it's like a continuity thing. Like,
yeah, but the continuity is really dependent upon my ability to recognize this other person. That's a big factor at play here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So God's doing you a favor.
As far as I can tell, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So let's look at the final, the fourth and final argument that I see a lot in disability theology. So there's this statement that Amos Yong and Stanley Hauerwas use, and the claim is to eliminate the disability is to eliminate the person.
Okay.
Let me repeat that so you can really like hear exactly how strong the statement is. So to eliminate the disability is to eliminate the person. And Yong appeals to this in several writings, so not just his book on theology and Down syndrome, but also in like several different papers. And the idea, as far as I can tell, seems to be that certain kinds of disabilities are what Yong calls like identity conferring.
Okay.
Like they become really deeply ingrained in your identity or your sense of self. And these disabilities become so deeply ingrained in your identity that you just cannot exist without them. And he gives some examples of this. So these are examples of deeply identity conferring disabilities that you apparently could not live without. So Down syndrome is the obvious example in a book on theology and Down syndrome.
Yeah.
But he also gives the example of being like quadriplegic. Even having Alzheimer's is one of the examples he gives. And these are supposed to be things that are deeply identity conferring, and so you just couldn't exist without them.
Okay. So I think I kind of understand that. So like I've got this like scar on my arm that I've had since I was like 4. And I feel like, it's part of who I am now. And I'm like, if I didn't have it, like it'd be like, oh, like this is so weird. I don't have that scar. Like what? I feel different. So it's like there's some kind of parallel,
right?
In the sense that like if you take this away, like you're taking away that person's identity.
Right. Yeah. There's going to be like different things about you that you're just like, could I really be me without this? That's kind of the intuition it's trying to pump there. Okay.
So you're not persuaded by Jung's arguments here. So maybe you can explain a bit why you think that this is not true, that we'll still have these disabilities in heaven.
Right. Yeah. So we'll just go through them one by one. So we'll just start with the first one. So to remind everybody what the first one says. So the first one says that the only thing that needs to change in heaven is how the rest of humanity treats people with certain physical features.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I think it's definitely true that the rest of humanity needs to treat these people with love and dignity. Like there's no doubt about that in my mind. Like, and I don't think anybody's going to be debating that issue.
Right.
At least they ought not to debate that issue. If they do, then we've got some different things we want to say to them.
Yeah.
But I just find it really implausible that is the extent of God's healing in heaven. That's it. So consider my friend's dad again, the former lumberjack who's paralyzed from the waist down. So as you probably unsurprisingly, like after this accident, he became an atheist. So he's just like given up, belief in God, except on some days of the week when he's really angry, then he believes in God enough to the extent to say like, God, I hate you, which is, whatever. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Because So imagine I would go up to him and I would say like, hey, when you get to heaven, God's going to say to you, you know what, man, you can come on in, but you're going to be paralyzed for all of eternity. Like, like, what do you think is going to come out of this guy's mouth at that point?
Yeah.
Like, I think he's going to say he's going to have some very strong words for you. And I'm kind of thinking like, you're going to deserve every terrible thing that he says to you as well. Like, it just seems implausible to me. And so when I sit down and I think about all of the different people I know who say they're looking forward to being healed of their disabilities in heaven, and then I look at this kind of view, this sort of line of reasoning, which says that you only just need to be treated differently, I can't help but get the feeling that this is just spitting in their face. I find it kind of degrading to their actual desires for heavenly healing. I really do.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So, couldn't God, your friend's dad, like, let's suppose he wants to be healed, and God heals him, but maybe there's someone that wants to keep their disability, and could God honor that? Could that be part of the picture here?
That could be a picture. That's a way to nuance the picture. So Kevin Tempe and Scott Williams and some other people who are within analytic and medieval philosophy of religion, they're trying to tease out some of these arguments here a bit more, give them some more precision. And so one of the things they're trying to look at is to say, well, what exactly do you need in heaven? Do you need to get rid of your disability, or do you, or maybe it's fine? And so one of the kind of criteria that they're starting to play around with is to say, if it does not prevent you from growing closer to God, then, then it's not a problem for it to stay there in heaven forever. Okay. So like might say, like, if you lose all your hair, you might be kind of angry about it and you would prefer that you have a full head of hair. But when you get to the resurrection, you'll realize I don't really need a full head of glorious hair in order to love God.
Right.
Yeah. And so Amos Yong, there's a passage where he makes a similar kind of idea that, like, if you need to be rid of your disabilities in heaven, then God will do that for you.
Yeah.
And he even has like some statements, like, he'd said to me and also in his published response, where it's like, if you need that, sure. But for the rest of us who are happy with our disabilities, we'll keep them forever. I'm a little bit worried about the tone there because it sounds slightly condescending. Like, well, if you really need that, sure, God will do that for you. But also the main thing is I think it's unbiblical. I really do. I don't see the healing ministry of Jesus as kind of saying you can stay lame forever if you want. You can stay blind forever if you want, but if you need it, then I'll heal you and then you can come follow me.
Okay.
I don't really see that going on in the Gospels. I don't think that's really part of the gospel message there.
Okay. Yeah, so that's something we haven't talked about so far, is like the healing ministry of Jesus. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about that second argument. So the argument that says that people will be resurrected with disabilities because the disabled perspective says so. And if you disagree with the disabled perspective, you're psychologically or religiously immature.
Yeah. So the problem I have with this one is kind of what I mentioned several times now already. I think it's a form of colonialism. Like, I think it looks like certain people have come along and declared this is the disabled perspective, and if you don't agree with it, then you're just immature. You're not really disabled. You don't understand the disabled perspective. Get out of here. And I think this because I've seen it in real life, like online, and I've seen it in some of these different communities. I've seen it at conferences. I find it to be really demeaning to people who are disabled and who look forward to being healed in heaven.
Yeah, as most Christians have in the entire tradition, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of odd.
Yeah.
So, but in order to make sure that we really considering what actual people with disabilities think, let me give you an example of this.
Yeah.
So my family, we have a lifelong friend named Sylvia, and Sylvia was my sister and I's nanny growing up. She helped raise us, and so Sylvia has she's really bad arthritis in her hands and in a lot of her different joints. And at some point when I was a kid, if I remember correctly, she had all of the bones in her hands replaced with plastic bones.
Wow.
Yeah. So and there would be days where she would be. She'd be driving us somewhere and she would have to walk. And if she was having really bad arthritis pain that day, she would just really be struggling to walk. And I can't remember all the different surgeries she's had over the years, but she's had a lot to try to deal with this. But on days where she would be struggling to walk, she would say things like, I can't wait to get to heaven. And when Jesus gives me, real bones not made of plastic, but bones that are going to last forever, just, gives me a body where I won't have to deal with any of this anymore. And she really meant it because she's in pain, but she's also, really expressing a deep hope that she has.
Yeah.
And so Sylvia is someone she's very well educated. She taught me a great deal about the Bible and a great deal about theology. And so, I mean, I guess you could look at Sylvia and say, I guess she's psychologically and religiously immature. You could say that about her. But I would have very strong words for you if you said that, and I think you would deserve every terrible thing that came out of my mouth. If So I just want to say, like, this is just nuts. But but let me give like another further example, because I really want to hammer this point home, that this is banking on this idea of the disabled perspective, and there is no such thing.
Yeah.
So when I first wrote this paper and got it published online, the sort of responses I was seeing, people were saying things like, "Oh, you're just an ableist,
right?
You're not. You don't understand the disabled perspective.
Right.
You need to learn how to see your sister as made in the image of God." And these were like published responses to my work.
Wow.
I'm like, "Ooh,
wow,
okay." And my parents weren't super happy about that, but such is academia, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's this Bible study that my sister has gone to for many years, and it's a Bible study for people with special needs. And so when my paper got published, a lot of the families involved with this Bible study, they wanted to read the paper and see what was going on, and they were just shocked at this suggestion that you would have your disability forever in heaven. They were really surprised by this.
Yeah.
And so they came up to me, and I heard this from several different family members and several different people in the Bible study. They would say, "Thank you so much for standing up for us. It's like these people in their ivory towers want to take away our hope." And that really struck me, because there I am having, being told, I don't understand the disabled perspective. You're just an ableist. You need to learn how to see your sister as made in the image of God. And then I've got people here in this Bible study for special needs saying, "No, you're standing up for us. These other people are trying to take away our hope."
Wow.
I think what this demonstrates very powerfully is that you cannot talk in terms of the disabled perspective. There's no such thing.
Yeah.
You're just demeaning all these other people who are very well educated. They are not immature in any sort of way, and they have very, I think, biblically based desires to be healed.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so let's look at this third argument about being able to recognize people. So this is the idea that if my disabled loved one isn't disabled in heaven, then I won't be able to recognize them, or that my love for them will somehow be diminished.
Right.
So yeah, what do you think?
So this is one, like I said before, I've seen it in print. I've even been at conferences and heard disability theologians kind of run this sort of argument. I guess you could call it an argument. This is one that my family and I have talked about, I think, the most. Like, this is the one that's really, for some reason, kind of captured our attention a lot.
Okay.
And so we talk about it at great length. My parents, they find it to be an incredibly selfish reason. Like they just think it's selfish to demand that their daughter be a particular way for all of eternity just so they can recognize her. And when we talk about it, like, none of us can understand how our loving relationship with Kelly would somehow be negatively affected if God got rid of her disabilities. It makes no sense to us. We don't have any problem with imagining how, we can still love our daughter or my sister without her disabilities. I just find this inconceivable, how that could somehow diminish my love for my sister. But I also think, from like, when the philosopher in me though just goes, this is some really weird thinking going on here. So let me kind of tease out, I guess, more like less emotional responses and more like philosophical kind of response here. So what it's doing, it seems to me, is like, I think it's kind of like limiting God's power, or I guess making God's power to heal dependent on my ability to recognize someone in heaven.
Yeah.
And that's super weird.
Yeah.
So I think what's going on is it's confusing in identity over time issues. We talk about how certain views confuse epistemic issues with metaphysical issues. So I can confuse your identity over time with my ability to recognize it.
Right.
And your personal identity over time, it just should not be dependent upon my ability to recognize it.
Right.
So let me give you, like, I guess, kind of an example to tease this out. So my mom taught elementary school for many years. And so she was typically working with kids who are like 7 or 8 years old. And there'd be times we'd be like, say, like at the supermarket, and some full-grown adult will walk up and be like, "Oh, Mrs. Mullins, do you recognize me?"
Uh-huh.
And sometimes she's going to say, yeah. And other times she's like, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
and they'll be like, oh, I had you as a teacher in second grade, you know, back in the day. And she'll be like, oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I haven't seen you since you're 8. So, you know, good to see you. How's it going? Right.
Yeah.
So think about this, apply it again to this idea of like in heaven, you need this recognition. So does that mean like when these people get to heaven, like, do they have to be 8 years old in order for like my mom to be able to recognize them and to have a loving relationship with them? Like, does God have to make that happen?
Right.
And then you can kind of like twist the story a little bit more to make it even more absurd. So say I have those same students that my mom had, but I have them in university, like they're in my university classes. So we get to heaven, like, should God make them 8 years old so that way my mom can recognize them and have a loving relationship with them? Or should God make them look like they're 20 so that way I can recognize them and I can have a loving relationship with them? Like, whose like recognition matters more here? You know?
Right. Yeah.
And this whole thing, like, this example is just nuts, right? I mean, this is just absurd.
Yeah.
Like, and so I think that just kind of, when you start really thinking through how would this work in heaven if this is a rule of thumb or the principle for how we determine what kind of resurrected body you're going to have, you're going to get all sorts of crazy results and very conflicting results. And I just don't think that makes any sense.
Yeah. That's good. All right. So then this final argument put up by Young and Hauerwas to eliminate the disability is to eliminate the person.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a pretty strong statement here. What do you think about this?
Right. So yeah, I need to emphasize it again, like you said, it's a very strong statement. Yeah. And it's so strong that all you need to do to show that it's false is to just give a single counterexample. Because it says like to eliminate the disability is to eliminate the person. So all you have to do is just show a single case where a disability has been eliminated and the person persists. You know, they don't get eliminated.
Right.
Well, if you're a Christian theologian, you don't have to look too hard for a counterexample. All you have to do is just kind of read the Gospels. Like, I think it's pretty straightforward. So when you look at the Gospels, like you see the healing ministry of Jesus, and he's just like eliminating disabilities left and right. And he's obviously not eliminating people left and right, because otherwise, you know, Jesus would be a murderer, and I don't think he's a murderer as far as I can tell. Like, you know, but like it seems really silly when you think about it. So like imagine Jesus walks up to, you know, someone who's been born blind or born lame, and he goes to this person who's been born lame, and he's like, hey man, I could make you walk, but I'd actually kind of eliminate your existence if I did. So do you want to come follow me in my kingdom? Like, you know, like that's just not what's going on in the gospel texts. Like, it just seems silly to me.
Can I push back on this a little bit, Ryan?
Yeah, go for it.
So what about this though? So like maybe the way we're reading these gospel accounts is wrong. So like maybe we're reading this with an ableist perspective, and really it's really not about. Those stories aren't about Jesus healing the disability, the physical disability, but in, you know, first century Jewish customs culture, these people were ostracized. They were kind of refused from participating in the community. And so like what Jesus is doing in healing them is like he's restoring them back into the community so that they can like participate in what God is doing. And that's really the point of these narratives. It's really not about the healing per se.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I think that's part of the story, but I don't think it can do all the work, because it definitely is the case that a lot of these different disabilities that you see identified in the Gospels, they are associated with certain stigmas. So if you have certain like disabilities, you're not able to go into certain places of worship. You're not able to participate in certain religious and societal activities. So you are ostracized. And that's terrible. So if you're trying to, you know, be the Messiah and unite all people from all languages and all tribes and all that together, you know, you're going to have to get over this sort of stigmas that you have.
Yeah. So
obviously that's got to be part of it. But when you look at what Jesus actually does, though, he doesn't just go, hey, start treating these people with respect and end of story. You know, he actually goes, get up and walk and follow me. Yeah. And now they're entered back into the full community here. So what's that one story? This one always really tickles me. So it's this man who's born lame, and he's been begging, you know, and and Jesus comes across him, and Jesus heals him. And the Sanhedrin, like, they're really upset about it. Like, they're really pissed about this, right?
Yeah.
And so they call in the family, and they're like, is this your son? And they're like, yeah, it's my son. And then like they talk to the guy, and they're like, who healed you? And the son says something like, it was Jesus. Maybe if you want to go worship him, go talk to him. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to do with this. Like,
right.
So you've got Jesus clearly demonstrating the power to heal these people. And so I think what you have in the healing ministry of Jesus is not just the physical healing, which is what I'm clearly wanting to focus on, but you do have him, because of the physical healing, also healing the societal wounds and the religious wounds that people would perceive this individual has.
Okay.
I think that's got to be part of the story. And then I think when you apply that to, again, a case like my friend's dad, the lumberjack, I mean, this is someone who is deeply angry at God because of his physical state. And I don't think you're going to have some sort of, good, loving relationship between him and God without him being healed of that physical disability.
Okay.
It seems like if God's really going to heal you fully of your physical wounds and your psychological wounds, that's going to be the full story. It can't just be, fixing a few societal issues here or there.
Okay.
As if fixing a few societal issues is not a big deal. That's a huge deal. But
sure.
Yeah.
Right. So it sounds like you don't think that disabilities constitute someone's individual essence.
No.
That's like an essential part of who they are.
Right. And so, so to come back to the dictum from Hauerwas and Jung, to eliminate the disability is to eliminate the person. I think what it is doing is it's confusing something called narrative identity with what philosophers call your numerical identity.
Okay.
And so your numerical identity is basically like your individual essence, your essential properties, and the thing that you are, that you could not cease to you could not cease to have those properties and continue to exist.
Right.
So whatever that essence of Ryan is, I couldn't lack it and continue to exist.
Right.
And I think that what Jung and some of these others are doing, they're kind of trying to build disabilities into that. And I feel like I need a reason for thinking that's true.
Okay.
Especially when I consider a bunch of different cases that they want to say become identity conferring. So like Alzheimer's, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean, Alzheimer's, right now, I don't have Alzheimer's, as far as I know. Hopefully, I don't. I'm too young for it. So I'm existing just fine without Alzheimer's. I get it later. I get it later in life. Hopefully, I don't get it at all. But if I get it later in life, then it's clear that this is a contingent property of me. It's a contingent accidental property of my being. It's not something that I need to have in order to continue to exist.
Right.
You might push back and say, well, what about cases like something like Down syndrome or Fragile X, or whichever these like congenital disorders. I guess I just have no problem being a metaphysician and just saying I can imagine all sorts of possible worlds in which these individuals exist but don't have this disability. I don't find this inconceivable. I need a reason for thinking that it's inconceivable.
Yeah.
Point out like some sort of contradiction or some sort of metaphysical incoherence.
Right.
Go for it. I don't see it.
Yeah. And then when we add the eschaton into it, I feel like there's a whole new realm of possibilities, right?
Right. Exactly. Because if I see Jesus walk up to somebody and say, I know you've never been able to walk your entire life, or I know you've never been able to see your entire life, let me spit into some mud smeared on your face, now you can see. That kind of changes my intuitions about, people's individual essences and what counts as part of their individual essence. Or at least it should, I think.
Yeah. As just a random side question, does your view about whether you have a soul or if you don't have a soul, does that play into this at all, or is that kind of irrelevant to this discussion?
I feel like it should be very relevant. And this is something in my first paper, I asked Amos Yong to identify which philosophical anthropology he was working with. I was like, are you a substance dualist? Are you like a physicalist of some sort? You got some other view. And he said it's irrelevant. He refused to answer the question.
Okay.
And I just kind of thought, well, that's odd. Because my thinking was this. So if I'm a substance dualist, I am a soul, a non-physical, immaterial soul, and I have a body.
Right.
And I can exist without my body. So say I have like Fragile X or some other sort of chromosomal disorder. If I can exist without my body, well, then I can exist without my Fragile X. Like I don't, so it's just not a part of my essential individual essence.
Right.
Full stop. If I'm a physicalist, you might think that if you're born with some sort of chromosomal disorder, then that is a part of your individual essence. But then I can also imagine, I could kind of push back though. I could say, well, there's all these different like physicalists today who are really interested in transhumanism and think that like, if I just kind of like change some of my different body parts, like as long as I do it slowly over time, I can still retain my continuity.
Yeah.
And if that's right, then well, maybe even on a physicalist account, you could say, you're not identical to your disability.
Yeah.
And actually, let me give a really concrete example of this. Some people who are deaf are able to get a cochlear implant, which is like a thing you put in your ear and you can start hearing.
Right.
Not everybody who's deaf is able to get this, unfortunately, but there are a bunch of cases where people can. And so it seems like quite obvious. Well, in those cases, they're not identical to their disability. It's not identity conferring. This, whatever that means. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
that's helpful.
So there might be ways to kind of develop these different accounts given different philosophical anthropologies and see what falls out. It might be some of them strongly favor a disabled heaven, and it might be that some others clearly do not.
Okay.
But that's a debate I think that needs to happen though.
Okay. This is all really helpful and clarifying. Ryan, was there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, I mean, I guess just the main thing I want to say is these are issues that are very personal to me and very personal to a lot of people who are wanting to weigh in on this topic. So it can be very sensitive, and so I can understand why emotions get really, really hot and heated at times.
Yeah.
But I find it encouraging that there are more people in analytic philosophy who are wanting to try to weigh in on this topic, to try to bring about some kind of clarity to these different issues and try to bring some more nuance and precision in the arguments that we should consider. And so I really hope that continues to grow so that way we can have much better conversations about these issues and really get to the bottom of things.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Ryan. Everything you've said has been really helpful, and I appreciate your willingness to share. It's
sure,
great.
Thank you. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please subscribe and please share with your friends.